Black like me. Black like me. Black like me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, good people. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Man, where's the time gone? Season 11 is just soaring, and I'm enjoying it so much. You know, each season I think this is the one for the books. This is the season where I have this great gamut of guests, differing opinions, different backgrounds. Then I move to the next season, and then we do it all over again. And so I'm really excited about our guest who's in the studio today, because we're going to talk about history. We're going to talk about its supposed erasure, and just how do we look at all of what's happening from a historical lens. We'll often do it from a political lens, a sociological lens, but I thought it'd be really nice to sit down with a historian and talk about this from a historical lens. And so my special guest today is not new to Black Like Me. He's been a guest before, and our paths have interacted a lot. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But I'm here today with my friend, Dr. Steve Kantrowitz. Dr. Kantrowitz is a Plainard Bascom Professor of History and an affiliate faculty member in African American Studies, American Indian Studies at UW-Madison, where he teaches courses on race, indigeneity, politics, and citizenship. He received his PhD from Princeton and his BA from Yale, and he's the author of More Than Freedom, Fighting for Black Citizenship in a White Republic by Penguin, and Ben Tillman and the Reconstruction of White Supremacy, UNC Press 2000. There are so many things that he's done. I don't want to embarrass him, but I appreciate his public-facing work, including several projects within the university, like looking at the history of the KKK on the UW campus. Boy, the more things happen, the more the things change, the more the things stay the same. We'll talk about that a little bit. And he's worked closely with the Public History Project at UW-Madison as well. He does a number of things off campus, including teaching in communities, as he has with me and other colleagues for our Justified Angers Initiative community course that's entitled Black History for a New Day. And he brings all that wealth, all that passion, all that experience here to the Black Like Me podcast studios. Steve, it's so good to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Most days, I'm doing well. I'm working hard to find that silver lining. And I just refuse to fall into the trap of just commenting all the time on some of the crazy stuff that's going on.
Yep.
And just building to showcase success and Black brilliance and excellence in the face of all of this. Now, I know we've done this before, but for the people who are newer listeners, we're going to talk about how we met. But first, I just got to ask you a couple of icebreakers. Mm-hmm. And I don't always do this with non-Black audience, but I thought, you know what, let's build some consistency. Let's be an equal opportunity icebreaker. I'm not sure if I've asked you this before. Grits or cream of wheat?
Oh, grits, definitely.
I knew we had a lot of stuff in common. now, here's where we might part ways. How do you like your grits? Sweet or savory? What's
savory?
Oh,
yep. You lose me there.
We're having some technical difficulty right now. He's sitting right across the table from me, and I can't hear him. No, talk to me about the way you like them, because savory grits are fantastic also.
Yeah, it has to do with the first places that I was introduced to grits. It's really when I was already grown in South Carolina. In the 1990s.
You got real grits.
I would say so.
Yes,
I would say so. This was not Waffle House. This
Yes.
was a higher order homemade, Edgefield County, South Carolina.
Oh, really? Well, I just want to send out an apology to Waffle House, because they are one of our corporate sponsors, and so I think we just lost that sponsorship. No, I'm totally kidding. So now, did you have fish or shrimp in it as a savory, or was it butter and salt was sort of a breakfast?
Shrimp and grits, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
Now, you know what I have to say to folks who are listening to me? I do support that. Now, I was like in my 40s, almost 50s, when some friends from Georgia took me to get shrimp and grits. And again, as a kid, my grandmother, my mom would make them lots of butter. The butter would float on top. Sugar, it would just almost crystallize, almost like a creme brulee. And then it's that with scrambled eggs and bacon and toast. I didn't know that it was a dinner item. Now, my wife likes salt in hers just for breakfast. But with shrimp and grits, that is really good. I sort of got angry because I realized people have kept that from me for most of my life.
That's a really, really tasty way to eat shrimp and eat grits. It's hard to tell which is the delivery vehicle for the other.
That's right. That's right. But it's it's a good thing. I'm curious when sometimes there's people will use Black slang where they'll talk about if something's happening, something's going on, they'll talk about, wow, we almost had to throw hands. I'm sure. Are you familiar with that terminology of throwing hands?
I have heard it, and I assumed that I knew what it meant.
What do you think?
Well, it summons up its own image, right?
Yes. Not that we're condoning violence on Black Like Me podcast, but all right, well, one, gotcha. And hey, and lastly, have you ever jumped double Dutch?
I am much too uncoordinated for that. I feel like I'm going to fall down when I watch children do it.
Now, you grew up in Boston, right?
I did, yeah.
Did kids play double Dutch? Was that a big Boston thing?
I did not see double Dutch in the part of Boston that I lived in, which is a very white part of Boston. I saw double Dutch when I went to college, actually. So I saw school children in New Haven, Connecticut. Doing that when I was teaching in a after school program there, and that was my introduction to that art and science.
You're like, wait, what's going on? Wait, there's two ropes and they're intertwined.
I could not quite believe what was happening.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
Oh, I haven't mentioned this on the show. So I spent my first 6 years of life in Chicago before moving to Madison, and double Dutch is just what kids did. Outside so much. You could always find a clothesline. That's what it was. You go get someone's clothesline, and so it was inexpensive fun. But, when you turn regular overhand, it's called double Dutch. But if you do the same thing underhand, it's called under Irish.
Huh.
And so usually people who can jump double Dutch real well could jump under Irish. My mom could do it. And so most people just do double Dutch. And so if you ever see people doing double Dutch, you might say, hey, can you do that underhanded? Not double-handed, because double-handed means you can't turn. Because if you're turning double Dutch right, it sounds like this. But if you're double-handed, it's like, if you want to get a fight, it's like cutting your partner in spades. If you can't turn double Dutch, they're like, somebody get on this rope. I'm trying to jump. This girl is double-handed. So no, man, that was fun to be able just to ask you just some of those Black ice-breaking questions. For the audience, for their sake, before we jump into this, let's just go back a bit. You and I met right after I had written an op-ed piece called Justified Anger. We were both panelists for a film, I believe, at the public library downtown.
Yeah, that's right.
And then as they introduced us, they mentioned that you were a history professor. And I remember waiting around afterwards saying, hey, can I take you out for breakfast or coffee? I have this idea. This thought was brewing in my head. Having graduated from UW-Madison's Afro-Am department. It's now called African American Studies, but back in the 70s and 80s, we called it the Afro-Am department.
Hard for me to make that transition.
Right.
Honestly.
I definitely. Yeah. I still say it, and I actually hear faculty say it.
The older faculty, for sure.
Not the current chair, Dr. Clark Pujara. I know you called it the right name, but for others. But I told you that I had this dream of a community history class because if people understood how we got to where we are today, they would think more strategically about how we go about dismantling it. It was just sort of a theory. Well, it certainly has lived out all these cohorts and 5,000 plus people later. But what many people don't know is that you and I sat down at breakfast. I think was our first one at the University Club.
I think so, yeah.
And I just shared my idea with you. And I'm just curious, did you think I was crazy by wanting to do a community history class that would help non-Black allies think differently about how we work together?
I did not think that was crazy. I was quite excited about it and very interested in it. And it, as you remember, it took a while for us.
We met for months.
We met for months, and then gradually pulling a bigger team together, and then working with them, and
yes,
it was a long process putting that together.
Right. what happens to me sometimes as a visionary is that I'll put an idea out that I feel pretty strongly about. But then when people get excited about it and I look in their eyes and I realize, they're getting it. I almost want to have a Jerry Maguire moment and say, wait, this is just a memo. I'm not trying to write a manifesto. Like, I'm just talking. Like, this is just a theory. Like, it started getting serious, and we started talking about text and how often we would do this. And so that probably contributed to the time that it took.
For sure.
But I remember Paul was in one of those discussions who ended up getting his PhD from the history department, and he's a teaching faculty member now. But it's just it's cool to see how ideas like those come about, and we took our time to build it correctly. And it was we designed that. I can't remember its relationship to what happened in Ferguson, whether it's just slightly after that or slightly before it. But certainly enough other things happened that it was just the right thing at the right time. I remember President Obama was in office when we launched the first one with about 75 to 100 students. But then I remember when Trump was elected in 2016, the class almost doubled because people felt, wait, what are we doing here? Let's look at history and let's look at how we got here. And I think one of the questions, Steve, that people ask, which helps to lead into some of what we're going to discuss, is how did I not know this? And you probably remember during your lectures, people would raise their hands and just say, wait, if this is true, if there was a Harlem Renaissance, if it really took 2.5, 3 years for Black people in Texas to understand that freedom had already been granted, then why didn't we learn this? And then when they Google the information that you all are sharing and find out that it's true, that it's verifiable, the look of fear in people's eyes, almost as if to say, and one gentleman did say it, I know I was taught incorrect information about your history, Alex, but I never assumed that my history was messed with. And now I'm scared because I don't know if I know who I am. And so that was just a very powerful moment of people just grasping the concept that maybe history was tainted.
Absolutely. And it was a big wake-up call for me too, honestly, because, at the point that we started doing this, I had been teaching at UW for 20 years, and the overwhelming majority of the students that I teach are between 18 and 22 years old.
Right.
So it's not a surprise that they don't know the history.
Sure.
It's my job to teach it to them.
Right.
And I assume that because I'm doing that pretty effectively, and I've got tons of colleagues who are doing that pretty effectively, that the world is filled with people who understand this history. And that might be true. But it's also the case that we have all of these extremely well-educated, thoughtful, community-engaged professionals in Madison who simply don't know this history.
Right.
And I'm not pointing fingers at anyone except an educational system that hasn't prioritized this and made it an absolutely essential part of people's education. It's not these folks' fault that they don't know it, but it is shocking anyway.
Sure. I mean, I love the fact that you use the word shocking because, I've looked at the demographics of that group. Probably over half of them have advanced degrees. Many have matriculated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Yeah. We drew a very educated crowd, but to have people sit there mesmerized for weeks studying things that was completely foreign to them was a real shock to me because I just thought people knew and didn't give a rip. I didn't know that people didn't know. Yeah. So I had to really rethink some of my interactions and the way people dealt with things, because it's one thing to be informed and then you continue acting the same way. But I began to understand how people could be kind-hearted and still do things that's damaging and have no historical context or no internal mechanisms to say, you probably shouldn't say that. You probably shouldn't do that. But that's where we started all of this. We kicked this off and we found out that it wasn't a fluke because the next cohort had the same experiences. Then a cohort after that had the same experiences.
Yep.
We began seeing some of this during President Biden's, during his term, his presidency, this attack on critical race theory or CRT. We didn't know really where it was going, but like this full-fledged assault to redact history because it was making certain populations feel insecure. I think a lot of us just felt like, okay, this is madness. Who's going to do this? How do you call this critical race theory? This is not really what critical race theory is, and we're certainly not teaching critical race theory. It does exist, but we're not teaching it to second graders or even middle schoolers or high schoolers. And so we saw that beginning, but now it's come back with this vengeance. And sometimes I look at these things and just say, wow, they're burning books, and they're burning like not just novels. They're burning like history books, like textbooks. Like I just grew up thinking you don't toss books, you give them away, you don't damage them. I didn't realize it, but my mom was an intellectual, so like there was this huge reverence for books. But to see books, but including academic books, just being erased, and so saying that they're burning books might not be the right terminology, but in your world, how are you describing what's currently happening right now?
Well, one way to think about it is to go back to that metaphor from George Orwell's 1984, which is things are being thrown in the memory hole.
Good quote.
When facts are inconvenient for the current political order, just stuff them in the burn chute. So it's not a literal burning of books.
Sure.
It's an erasure of people's ability to access them, and that can amount to the same thing for most people. I was really struck the other day by the list of books that were and were not removed from one of the Service Academy's libraries. So a book critiquing the bell curve and all of its, I think, quite nefarious nonsense about race and IQ. The book critiquing the bell curve was removed from the library, but the bell curve itself was not.
Interesting.
And I think here that's the mode here, is that anything that presents a critical perspective on racism or the history of racism is illegitimate. An historical expression of racism, that's not a problem.
While there's this all-out attempt to erase history, we're making history. So at some point, someone's going to write books about what's happening right now. But in your career as a historian, did you ever fathom that we'd face a day where history and texts that have largely been digitized are like being removed or erased or illegalized?
I guess I did, in the sense that this war that we're currently fighting a rearguard action, I think, a little bit. This war's been going on in the creation and distribution of American history textbooks for decades. I think it's now 30, 40 years at least since Francis Fitzgerald wrote America Revised, which is a book about American history textbooks and the political fight over their content. And, it was, for a long time, it was the Texas Board of Education that we pointed to, and their ability to, because the giant size of that textbook market, their ability to call the shots and either prevent certain features of textbooks from appearing nationally or demanding special editions for Texas. But what was a kind of a low-grade kind of Cold War, cold culture war around this is now super hot. And has forced librarians and academic administrators and the leaders of academies and colleges and universities and public library systems to decide whether they are going to acquiesce in these demands. And many have not, and some, to their shame and discredit, have. So
right. Are there any modern examples of nations going through what we're going through right now with actual removal? Could you do? I mean, I know I'm asking you this cold, but I'm curious just to know what comes to mind.
This is the authoritarian playbook, and this is what happened in Putin's Russia as he was cracking down on civil society there. Now, very, very successfully over the last couple of decades. This has been the playbook over the last decade in Orban's Hungary. And it is the playbook adopted by far-right authoritarian parties wherever they're rising to power or briefly achieving power, because it is really important to control the national historical narrative. And you can see that in the president's executive order, Trump's executive order on American history, which just very unapologetically calls for a patriotic history, one that people makes people proud of their country. And I don't object to people feeling proud of their country.
Right, exactly.
That is one among many legitimate responses to being a member of a nation state. But
that sounds harmless.
It sounds harmless until you realize that it's a decree that intends to be enforceable, that intends to say we will decide what patriotic means, and we will decide what is and is not patriotic. And if we decide that what you are saying or publishing is not, then we will deem that unacceptable. And then the question is, what can they do about it?
Sure.
Right? And do we assume that they can do nothing and just keep doing what we're doing without worrying about it? Do we assume they can do some things, but do what we're doing despite that? Or do we begin to retreat, to back off, to censor ourselves, and to preemptively comply with what we imagine to be their dictates to us? And that the last one there is the one I'm afraid of. And the one that I hear colleagues in Texas and Oklahoma already worrying about, places where they have this kind of authoritarian movement in the teaching of history coming from the national government, but also from their state governments and from their state superintendents of education and from their governors. And when that happens, when the levels get in sync with each other and focus down, that's where people's careers, lives become very different very quickly. We are very fortunately not in that situation in Wisconsin because our governor, I truly believe, would not stand for that.
Right.
But it's a little alarming to think that we're one gubernatorial election away from having to make some really hard choices.
Wow. If we were seeing huge attacks, I mean we are, but let's just say if there was a huge environmental issue, of course people would look to environmentalists in laboratories or universities saying, what do you see? What's on the horizon? What do you how do you view this? Do historians, particularly those who are working in the academy, are they feeling extra weight because we're talking about history? I mean, it's not biology that's being challenged. It's not, do UFOs exist? We're talking about things that you all have you have worldwide notoriety for your specialization in these matters. What is that like to hear someone just referring to it as almost rumor or speculation when you each know more than anyone because of what you've read and studied that this is true? Talk to me about that angst.
My friend Tim Tyson likes to say, they don't object to my interpretation. They object to the facts of American history. And that's often what it is.
That sounds very Tim Tyson.
That's often what it is you present people with historical facts, evidence, interpretation based on that facts and evidence, and they say, I don't like it. Either I don't believe you, or you're biased, or that makes me feel bad. And any one of those becomes the basis for a claim, different kinds of claims, but a claim that doesn't belong in the classroom.
Wow.
And that's not new. I should say that is not new. That the war over who gets to write the national history and who gets to teach it and how, that's been going on, for a couple of centuries.
It has, sure.
And since history's been a modern method in practice, which is now, going on 150 years, not quite. For the first 50 years of the production of American history, virtually everyone producing it was a white man. And then there were small numbers of white women and small numbers of people of color who could claim professional status in the historical profession and achieve, advanced degrees, take their places in the professoriate in certain ways and places and times and publish books. But it really was not until, with a few exceptions, really not until after World War II and really into the 1960s that the profession significantly diversified in the sense that you could enter a department of history anywhere in the country and not expect to see 90% of the faculty be white men. That's happened in my lifetime.
Wow.
So we're in a. I know it feels like that's ancient history because I'm almost 60 years old now, but in fact, in even in the national history, this is a comparatively brief period of time in which who gets to tell American history and from what perspective and in what voice has changed pretty dramatically as the nation, and who gets to speak for the nation and as a representative of the nation has also changed. And as we saw with the election of President Obama, that change can cause some people to lose their minds.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Now, I might be showing a bit of my naivete about how history is recorded or documented. So I would imagine as a historian, you pick an era, you want to look at information that happened there, and you become an expert in looking at that country, that period of time.
Yeah.
Is it within the scope of historians to say what's happening right now, today, is history in the making, or is that more of a sociological, with sociology departments sort of look at that and document it? I'm just curious about how historians respond to the documentation of what's happening today.
Historians have a hard time not collecting documents from today. I think, especially historians who are working in a national history. Sure. And thinking about it, especially historians like me who work in comparatively modern histories, histories of the last couple of centuries, as opposed to much more distant histories. But, I guess I would say a couple of things about that go in different directions. One is that, yes, we do see part of our role as documenting the past and preserving the present as a record for future historians. But the value added that historians have that we bring to bear is historical perspective and historical methodology. And some of those perspectives and methodologies don't work as well when we're focused on the moment that we're in, because it's much harder for us to see to cut through the noise of the moment and understand which parts of what we're seeing are really emblematic of what's happening in a moment and which are the kind of noise that take place in any moment. So there can be a tendency to overread contemporary trends as indicating that history is moving in a certain direction. Everybody does this. It's inevitable that we do this. It's just something that we watch out for.
Sure. A few minutes ago, you mentioned that the erasure of history has happened in Putin's Russia. You talked about Hungary and other places. Have those attacks been partnered with a general attack against academic research or academic institutions at the same time, or is that part unique to what's happening in America today?
No, that's part of the same playbook.
Is it really?
Because science, scholarly inquiry, the exchange of ideas in that sphere, and the promulgation of that kind of knowledge both requires a lot of social input, a lot of money and time and investment, and also requires a lot of liberty. Requires a fairly freewheeling world in which, within the canons of evidence and science that fields work in, people are free to do the work that they think is important in the ways they think is important, subject to the review of their peers, right? And of their scientific and scholarly communities. And that creates a center of authority, of knowledge and science that is separate from the state, that is not controlled by the government. And that is very threatening to regimes that want to have control over what people know, what people think, and what people think is possible. And so if the ideology of the regime is that the leader is always correct, and that the regime's economic basis, as in, say, Russia, is based on petrochemicals, then having an independent scientific apparatus focused on the problem of anthropogenic climate change is very threatening.
Sure.
Right? And so you can't allow that to persist. And now in the former Soviet Union and Russia, it does not. And the same thing is underway here, I'm afraid, with the freezing of enormous numbers of billions of dollars of grants for scientific inquiry. I mean, in my, just to put this in parentheses, in my world, we look for very, very small amounts of money. Like the amount of money it takes to buy a year of my time and let me write a book that then finds a scholarly audience is tiny. It doesn't pay for one important piece of lab equipment in a fusion lab. Not even close. It barely pays for the recombinant DNA you need for different kinds of studies, right? It's really cheap. We're so cheap. The National Endowment for the Humanities, which is the main federal agency that funds historical and all other humanities research in the United States, I think spent last year less than $200 million with an M.
Really?
But the number of dollars that is being withdrawn from hard natural sciences and biological sciences now is staggering. Yes. It's in the many, many, many billions of dollars. And it is not only going to prevent good research from being done, it's also going to prevent the training of the next generation of scientists, which is a very long pipeline process. And when you stop the pipeline, it takes a long time to restart it. We learned this in COVID. But the damage being done now is not something that can be reversed in the same amount of time that it's being done. These are not switches you can turn off and on. This is very serious business. It's also serious in my field. We are much cheaper, but we are also vulnerable. There are very, very, very few jobs for new PhDs even in American history right now.
Really?
Yeah. And as that market for people with advanced degrees in history dries up, the universities also look around and say, well, all these federal dollars have dried up, and we've relied on those dollars to sustain the mission of this institution, without which that research can't continue. Right. And therefore, we're going to have to draw on the institution's other resources to make up that difference. And where do you think those other resources come from? They come from the same pot of money that we rely on over in the humanities. So we're all in this together. But the boat is, when the boat takes on water, we're all going down with it.
Sure. Man, oh man, is it crazy out here. And I don't think it's just me. Look, it's 2025. Trump is back in office, and some days it seems as if the sky is falling. There's so much uncertainty in the world right now, but I love that sitting down right here in front of this mic and letting the hard truths rumble out of my heart and off my chest is as certain as it ever was. Season 11 is gathering steam, and you're in for a real treat. Let me just tell you. When I reflect back on all of the seasons that we dropped here at Black Like Me podcast, each of them has had a special purpose, a one-of-a-kind lineup of guests, and its own unique field. I also think about the thread that binds them all together. What we do here at Black Like Me is unique. I don't have another space that feels just like this, where I can really speak from my unique perspective. And the guests who have on the show remark that these interviews they do here are unlike any others that they've done in other places. Sure, nobody else does Black Icebreakers, but that's only part of it. We have created a truly unique space here where honest conversations about the thoughts, the ideas, the policies that affect Black people and that Black people care deeply about. And you know what? It isn't easy. And I don't do this all alone. I have an incredible team that has steadily grown over the years, and each person that joins adds another asset to what we can do here. And all of you that support us on Patreon, my people, my people, my people. We simply would not be able to do what we do or get what we have gotten without you. So as we look to even bigger and better things in the coming season, please help support the show right now by clicking the link to Patreon in the show notes and join the community of people supporting this unique and provocative space. in the world that we're living in, where there's so much attack on our perspectives, our history, our bodies, and our lives and contributions, aren't you glad you have a place where you can still hear powerful, exhilarating, intellectual Black thought like you do? I enjoy it. And so if you do too, share the good news, tell friends, click that Patreon link now. Thank you so much for your support of Black Like Me podcast with Dr. Alex G. Can you talk a little bit about how this is going to change how and where people look for real history and real information?
Yeah. There is so much real history out there. There is no shortage of it. Getting access to it and getting access to histories that non-specialists can make sense of and do something with, that's more difficult, but still, there are lots of historians writing and working who are serious scholars, but whose interest is in writing books that non-specialists can make sense of if they're willing to put some time into it. I'm not talking about a feel-good book that you might hand to your father or your uncle on Father's Day that they may or may not read, that confirms their sense of the nation they live in or the leader they're reading about. But rather a book that asks you to think anew about some part of American history. And so, like, for example, the great historian of Reconstruction, Eric Foner, has spent his career writing books that non-specialists can and do read to make sense of that crucial part of our past. The Civil War historian James McPherson did the same thing. My dissertation supervisor, Dr. Nell Irvin Painter, does the same thing in a series of books that non-specialists can easily read and make sense of to understand, in her case, the life of Sojourner Truth or the history of the idea of white people. So there are lots of people, or my former colleague Ned Blackhawk, who wrote a wonderful sort of survey of Native American history, the rediscovery of America. There are so many people working and doing this work to make it available that I don't think the problem is that if people want access to real history, they can't get it. I think the problem is that the students in schools are going to lack encouragement to seek out those histories because the diktat will have come down from above that that's DEI.
We certainly see the framework for that. I think you've touched upon this a little bit, but I'd love to hear you just elaborate on what's at risk when history is just challenged like this. How far can it go in America?
We already know what a nation looks like when large segments of the population don't know their history and are threatened by a truthful accounting of it, right? But one of the consequences is that people dig in the place where they are and assume that that is the only way that things are or should be. Or if they're unhappy with the place they are, that it's because certain outside forces have wrought unacceptable change upon that system. And I understand how that can be, or why it can look like that. But one of the points of history is to offer people a broader perspective on how things are and how they got to be that way, that doesn't just reconfirm what they know from their own particular vantage point, whether that's geographical or based on identity or in some other way, right? Or based on their faith, right? And when history is degraded or disparaged, the risk is that people stop thinking of it as a positive thing to learn to see the world in more complex terms, and are encouraged and said to see it in the simplest possible terms. You can see that right now. You just have to turn on the TV and see those public service announcements from the Department of Homeland Security, which looked like they were produced in some satirical science fiction movie about a fascist government. It's really hard to imagine the distance between that representation of the world we live in, and the representation that historians, you know, at our best, and even at our not so best, but ordinary good,
Sure.
right?
Yes.
Try to understand.
You know, I have a colleague who I've become very fond of over the years, and she served as the U.S.'s first two-star major general. And she wrote a post on Facebook saying, reluctantly, she went to the Department of Defense's webpage because someone encouraged her to just search about her history and her story.
Yeah.
And she said it was just all removed.
Yeah.
And she didn't feel that it was archived. So she wouldn't even know where to go to find it. It's almost as if it never existed.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I start looking at the impact of this, particularly in digital spaces,
Yeah.
and you're not redirected. So it's not like, you know, some things, it moves down, you know, in the web search. That becomes real disheartening because that makes it personal because I know her. I know what she's done. I'm familiar with her career. I was at her retirement party.
Yep.
And for all of that work to be gone so that other young women, other black women, other black people can't find that, that someone someplace can make a call and with a few strokes of keys, that person's life work is gone. That's so frightening.
It seems pretty clear based on what things disappeared from federal websites that in many agencies there were people simply going through the directories of their web presence and doing Control F for a series of words and removing every page that had those words on them. And so you not only removed you know, African American and female firsts from the services and from other places, but also removed anything with the word trans in it, even if it was transgenic mice, right?
They just
So there's a real kind of know nothing censorship process going on there. I think when it is the federal government at work, we can fairly call it censorship, even if it's just censoring itself. However, at the moment, it is possible for your friend to find her webpage. There's this resource called the Wayback Machine, which has been archiving the internet over and over and over again for many, many years. And it's I would bet dollars to donuts that her webpage is still available and searchable there.
We're going to check it and we're going to add that link.
Yeah. Now, those are not. There's nothing magical about the Wayback Machine. It's just another server. It's vulnerable to all the same things that the rest of the world is. But the internet is not the Library of Alexandria. You don't burn it once and it's gone. It's
right.
We're more robust than that, and I think, you know, pulling on my deep fondness for science fiction here, I would say, you know, if we look forward, we're looking at a world 20 years from now, it's as though we went through an electromagnetic pulse. And it's going to take a while to reconstruct all the stuff that got lost.
But we will.
Much of it.
Okay. That's important. I need to believe that, friend. I need to believe that. Because she was just so disheartened.
Yeah, it's terrible.
You know, she's a vet. She's she's served our country overseas, and to hear her say, like, what did I do wrong? Like, how could you do this to someone who served so faithfully? When you look at people historically who have gone along with and followed the regimes that have led people down this similar path, was it supported by people who really believed that this was the way to go and they were just like sheep just following some shepherd off a cliff? Or were people just ignorant and didn't know that was a part of it? I guess I'm trying to figure out what percentage of our folks seem to be mean-spirited and they're like, this is the way America needs to be. And how many are just like, I didn't know it meant that. I didn't know we were going to lose Jackie Robinson's information. I didn't know this was going to happen. I just thought we were going to protect the borders. So I'm just any sense historically how this gets such wide buy-in?
You know, this is the big question, right? This is the question that's animating all the conversations in both political parties, I'm sure, about what the strategy is for building the coalition for the next election, right? Because the question is, how committed are Trump's base voters? How many of them are fully committed to the entirety of this project and happy to follow this wagon all the way into a kind of authoritarian
Sure.
moment, fully engaged in that. If you'd asked me 30 years ago what percentage of Americans were up for that, I would have said 15. I now think the number is much higher. I don't think it's the same size as the Republican base, but I think it's much larger than 15%. And I think you can see that. I don't have the opinion polls in my head right now, but when people are polled on really basic things like, should the president be able to overrule the Supreme Court and do whatever he wants?
Right,
as effectively the question has been posed in the case of some of these quite unlawful deportations and renditions of folks overseas. And in the defiance of the federal government against that, the numbers there fall below the president's approval ratings. So you have numbers in the 30s, but not the 40s yet, not the 50s. We're not in a moment when a majority of the country says, yep, democracy didn't work, let's do something else. But we're in a moment when a solid third of the country is probably willing to go along with that statement. I'd love to see that statement polled. But that's a very daunting prospect, right? Is having to confront that degree of rebellion against the constitutional order by people who profess to be supporting it.
Right. What's the opportunity right now for community-based organizations that are Black-facing, like Nehemiah's Justified Anger, or the Center for Black Excellence in Culture? Will the onus be on some of us to help to hold to this history that's being redacted? Do we develop stronger partnerships with history departments? Like, who owns the responsibility of making sure the history is not lost for the general population?
I think the only bulwark against a more successful assault on an honest and searching American history happens at much higher levels of political and social organization than history departments, or even communities. I think we need to win elections. We need social solidarity around basic questions of human rights and human dignity, and we need a resistance movement that is fully committed to creating the biggest possible coalition in defense of those really basic ideas of human freedom and human dignity. And I think that will, if anything, will solve the problem that history is confronting right now. That's what will do it. I don't think that there's any smaller scale that is actually going to protect free inquiry than that.
So by and large, historians are not leaping out of windows saying our history is gone, our world is destroyed because all of our work and all of true history has now been redacted, never to be found again.
No. In part because, at least in the world that I move in, no one has been told you can't teach that successfully. Some people may have censored themselves already. And I will say, I teach a class every fall called Who is an American? Which is a course about citizenship and inclusion and exclusion, and it covers the United States from the Revolution to the present, or the near present. I tend to stop the class around 2015. That was a decision I made right at the beginning because I started teaching the class in 2016. But that started to seem like a good idea because I don't need to talk about the last 10 years of American history to make the points I want to make about the nature of those dynamics over its history. But I'll say this, I'm going to be teaching that to, maybe as many as 200 or 250, mostly first-year students in the fall. And I decided for the first time ever, I'm not going to let senior auditors, that is, 60-plus-year-old Wisconsin residents, audit the class this year. Because I can't take the chance that there's someone in there who is going to decide to make mischief. Record my lectures, selectively quote me. Now, I am not a partisan lecturer. I don't talk about party politics in class. I don't talk about my politics in class. I think some of the students can't even figure out what my politics are. But it would be possible to make mischief, and it would be possible to make me look bad, and it would be possible to do that if you were determined not to tell the truth.
Right.
And unfortunately, that is where the premium is right now, is on not telling the truth. So unfortunately, the 30 or 40, 60-plus-year-old Wisconsin residents
won't be able to
audit the class because I can't take the chance.
Wow.
So that's not self-censorship, but that is a loss. And that's a loss I'm already experiencing here.
Sure. I have this question, and feel free to touch upon it or not, because we can work all kinds of magic with with editing. But I've been thinking about this question. The Trump administration has been using claims of anti-Semitism in many of its attacks on academic institutions, like Columbia and Harvard. And I know that this is a real complicated issue, and he's doing it in the name of being of service to that community. Thoughts on that, or its impact on the community as you see it or experience it?
The great tragedy in our political discourse in the last year and a half or so is that people have accepted that this is a fight against anti-Semitism. It is mostly not. It is mostly a fight against free expression, and in particular, a fight against people's right to protest Israel's war in Gaza, which the United States has been supporting. It's as simple as that. And that battle, unfortunately, they have been very successful in making a certain kind of speech unspeakable, to the degree that NYU has just revoked the diploma of a young man who gave a graduation speech in which he just referred to the atrocities taking place in Palestine.
And they revoked his diploma.
Another university, I don't want to misquote which one, but a university in Washington, D.C., is now talking about investigating the graduation speech of a young woman who gave a similar speech the other day. At the point at which graduation speakers cannot, on the basis of their achievement, say the things that matter to them, simply protesting a war, that is a major assault on and infringement of people's basic rights of free speech and expression, and that is not a fight against anti-Semitism.
No.
That is something entirely different than that. It's also very interesting that a lot of students and organizations being targeted and legally harassed and barred from some campuses are Jewish organizations that are like Jewish Voice for Peace or other organizations, often quite complicated organizations, but nonetheless, we're a civil society. People belong to the groups they want to belong to, and that these organizations composed of Jewish students are targeted by these laws ostensibly fighting anti-Semitism. There's something is awry here.
Oh, definitely.
And I guess I would just say, and this is not to minimize or deny that there are expressions of anti-Semitism in many quarters. In fact, I would say probably all quarters of American society, including protest movements against Israel's war in Gaza. But which political figures have met with known Holocaust deniers and overt, explicit anti-Semites in their homes? The president, meeting with Nick Fuentes and at Mar-a-Lago. If any Democratic politician had done that, that would have been the end of them.
Right.
And maybe legitimately so. But it's a shell game of the most grotesque kind the way that anti-Semitism has
yes.
been deployed to limit and degrade the nature of our political conversation in this country.
And because of that, I know that I personally worry sometimes about the backlash of this, of targeting Jewish folks in the future and trying to be defensive of all of what this current administration is doing. Is that a worry of yours as well?
You know, look, I grew up Jewish, mostly non-observant, although I did have a bar mitzvah. My parents were not and would never be temple goers. They did not believe in synagogue. They were not interested in any of that. But I grew up in a very Jewish environment, from an entirely Jewish ancestry. And I grew up in Brookline, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston that's about 50% Jewish.
Okay.
In other words, the moment I was born in 1965, I was born in the place and time when Jews have probably the safest they have ever been. Like, I could say, without being too hyperbolic, I might be the safest Jew who ever lived, right? Like,
Sure.
and even I can feel very much afraid. And that is the nature of the history of being Jewish in a world that's quite anti-Semitic.
Sure.
That's just true. But in practical terms, that fear has had very little impact on my life.
Okay.
Right? That is not the case for everybody.
Right.
There are many people whose worldviews are structured by their sense that the past is a wolf and it can get out of the cage at any minute.
Right.
And that's not crazy. That's not crazy.
Right.
But the yearning for a kind of total safety, which is not unique to Jewish people.
Right.
You know, like, lots of people imagine that it's possible to take whatever the fearful thing out there is, terrorist, for example.
Sure.
Right? And do away with it. In fact, in the George Bush era, in the era of the Iraq War, one of the policymakers in Bush's cabinet wrote a book called An End to Evil. Really
Right.
this grandiose idea that if you really rooted out terrorism, root and branch, you would end evil in the world. Might involve, dropping nuclear weapons on Tehran, or who knows what it would involve, right? Because the end to evil would involve quite a lot of evil, right?
Right.
But I think the problem is that people get very fearful, and then they imagine that there's a world of perfect safety, and then they get persuaded that if they will just follow this path, follow this leader,
Right.
that they can move toward that world of perfect safety and away from the dangers surrounding them. And, I think that's the world that that many but not all Jewish Israelis are living in right now. That is the world that a lot of Americans, not just American Jews, a lot of Americans, full stop, are living in right now. Is the world seems too scary, and anything that will make it seem less scary is okay. What that fear lets you do is the terrifying part.
Right. It opens the door for being radicalized, if we can use that in this context. Wow, this is a very important and heavy discussion, and so I'll just turn a little bit just to ask, what are you reading these days for your own pleasure? You have to do lots of reading for work, but I'm just curious, what kinds of things are you reading, if you don't mind sharing?
One of the privileges of being a senior scholar is that I can kind of do whatever kind of work I want now. And so I can follow my nose, and I can follow it down a very deep rabbit hole if I want.
Sure.
And following the last book I wrote, which is a book about the Ho-Chunk people in the 19th century United States, I got very interested in the ways that that settlers and immigrants and their descendants, mostly white people, thought about Native people in the 20th century. And that led me into the history of anthropology and the history of archaeology and some things I hadn't really ever read about or thought about before. And so I've been doing a lot of reading in those areas. But what that led me to, through a very curious pathway, is back to a science fiction writer I hadn't much read since the 1980s, Ursula Le Guin, who turns out to have had her entire imagination of the world and its possibilities and its terrors shaped by the fact that her father was this pioneering anthropologist of Native America in the early 20th century, Alfred Kroeber, who was trained by the great anti-racist anthropologist Franz Boas. And that her whole understanding of how people interact and what a culture is and how we work, how we make a multicultural world work and don't, comes out of that anthropological imagination of the early 20th century. So I went back and I've been reading her novels and stories from the 1960s. I'm sort of reading them chronologically forward in order to understand how that played out as she grew up and thought it through. So that's been a real pleasure. Just to go back to that
I
work.
love that. Asking academics what they like to read in their free time. And I guess as a follow-up to that, all the pressures that academic institutions come with, or being a partner or a parent in these crazy times, what kinds of things are you doing to stay sane and personal self-care?
Yeah. I try to get to the gym.
Okay.
I'm trying to teach myself to cook.
Really?
Which is something I've been historically bad at.
Any particular cuisine or just cooking in general?
It is the cookbooks made by this guy, Yotam Ottolenghi. British-Israeli guy, I think. They're all Mediterranean in their kind of sensibility, which is what my doctor says I'm supposed to be eating. And they're often quite complex, but they're always delicious. And they even are delicious when they have no meat protein in them. So that, to me, is a huge win because I'm the only meat eater left in my family. So I have to cook like this. So making a nice meal like that and sitting down and eating it with my wife and daughter now, that's a nice source of great pleasure when I can pull that off. Yeah.
That's really great. As we wrap up, I'll just let you know I just finished teaching my first course in the Afro-Am department. I don't know if we've talked since that.
We haven't. I heard about this.
Okay,
but we haven't talked about
I was hired as an adjunct to teach African American Studies 270, Rebuilding Black Societies, looking at examples of cultural, economic, and social innovation, and I absolutely loved it. The first day, I was just a sweating puddle of mess. I didn't know that I needed a particular code to log into the AV equipment, so I couldn't get my laptop to work. And it's a 1-credit course. It was a 1-credit course, and so it's just once a week, Wednesdays from 3:30 to 5:25. I absolutely loved it.
It does not surprise me one bit.
Steve,
You're a born teacher.
Oh my goodness! Well, you know what? That means a lot to me coming from you, and I mean that sincerely. To be given like my own classroom, and students coming in and asking me questions and being the expert on some of the information, it was really fulfilling. So for wonderful people like yourself who do this full time and you've done it for decades, I really admire you. The work and energy it takes to captivate people's attention and lead them in places they may not be ready to go, and navigating that during different times of local, national, or international peril is no easy feat. And so these students were listening to how you rebuild Black societies in light of all this happening in the world. I think what surprised me is that of my 12 students, only 3 were African Americans. And so, but again, it's African American Studies at UW-Madison, and I should have remembered that from when I was in the department 40 years ago. But the students were engaged, they asked good questions, they wrote great essays. So anyway, I just wanted to say, I love that. The department, hey, shout out to the African American Studies Department Chair, Christy Clark-Pujara.
Yes.
They gave me an office, I have a mailbox. And it's been nice to step out of the world of being a practitioner and actually use the work of the center and Nehemiah and Justified Anger as curriculum, and being able to curricularize my experiences coming from a Black and strongly oral tradition to have to think about how I want people to understand how I go about my work has been very, very meaningful. So I just needed to let you know that I have absolutely loved that. And
That's just
if
great.
they're listening, if they ask me to come back, I will do it again. Oh my goodness. Listen, my special guest today has been Dr. Professor Stephen Kantrowitz, and it's always a pleasure talking to you, whether it's bumping into you on campus, downtown, here in the podcast studio, in our auditorium where you're giving a lecture. It's always great to see you, and thank you for taking time to be with us today.
It's been a pleasure.
It means a lot to me. Hey, and just in closing out, I want to remind our listeners that we have a very new public-facing group on Facebook. If you haven't joined it or tried it, would you please just take a moment today? Just pause, go check it out. We've got the link. We've made it easy for you because we want to keep the conversation going, particularly after very interesting conversations like the one we just finished. You want to talk about it. You have ideas, you have thoughts, you have comments. So please check that out. I'm flanked by a wonderful team of people who help me to bring these very thought-provoking conversations to you. Eli Steenlich and Jeremy Holliday, who produce and edit the show. Mr. Don Thornton, who secures our great guests. Ariana Proctor, who curates and moderates our listener space. And Jakisha Hunt, who handles our wonderful podcast merchandise, or merch as we call it. To those of you who are Patreon supporters, I appreciate you more than I can convey. And for those of you who are not, hey, what are you waiting for? Click that link. You can support me with as little as $2 a month. That helps to assure that we continue to bring these uncensored and thoughtful conversations about the way the world functions and how Black people navigate it. So please take a moment to do that. And then lastly, to all of our listeners who make this worthwhile and make this very special, I appreciate you. Listen, don't just lean in and be entertained. Listen to this, repost it, write a comment, forward it to friends. This is great information that you can only find in few other places, particularly as it dovetails with Black culture and Black reality. So thank you all for being a part of this. It's my pleasure to be your podcast host, and thank you for being a part of this latest episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Have a great day.
Black like me. Black like me.
I want to thank you for taking time to listen to this episode of Black Like Me podcast with Dr. Alex G. If you like that opening track of our theme song, you can show your appreciation to Corey Saffold, who created that and produced it, and Marcus Fleming, my cousin, who's on vocals. I also want to say that this podcast was started with the generous support of the Human Family Unity Foundation, and so we always want to stop and thank them for that. For the many patrons who support us through our Patreon page, thank you, thank you, thank you. You don't just listen, but you support, you lean in, and you help this podcast to be what it is. And then I need to thank you, the listeners, who make a point of downloading this, listening to it, and sharing it. Without all of you, this podcast would not be what it is and what it's becoming. Thank you so much.